Welcome everyone. We'll start our Gita class. In last class we had done this verse. Vasansi jirnani yatha vihaya. And here Lord was explaining that just like a man is shedding the worn out garments and takes the other new ones, likewise the soul or the self, casting off the bodies, enters into the others which are new. So there has been a comparison so far between the body and the self, trying to show that they are different from each other. The reason why Lord is trying to show that they are different from each other, because most of the time I have a fallacy. I take myself as the body. So I take the self as the body, and therefore these teachings. So in the same line, there is another verse here, verse number 23. So I'll chant this verse one quartet at a time and you repeat after me. Nainam chindanti shastrani Nainam dahati pavakaha Na chainam kledayantyapah Na shoshayati marutaha. Now the whole verse together. Nainam chindanti shastrani Nainam dahati pavakaha Na chainam kledayantyapah Na shoshayati marutaha. We'll see the different words, grammatical analysis. This verse is a very popular verse, and in India many a times it is chanted at the time of the death of a person. So na is a indeclinable, enam is a nominal pronoun, chindanti is verb, shastrani is nominal, na is indeclinable, dahati is a verb, pavaka is a nominal, na is indeclinable, cha is also indeclinable, enam kledayanti is a verb, apa is a nominal, na is indeclinable, shoshayati is a verb, and maruta is a nominal. So we see that there are 1, 2, 3, and 4 verbs. So they are really short sentences in this verse, as you can see in the Anvaya. So the meaning here, indeclinable, so na means not. Enam, if you remember, we have done this one earlier also. Enam, it has come in the earlier verses also. Ya enam ajam avyayam. So enam refers to this, but it has a special characteristic, this particular word. It is used to refer to something which is already described. So because there is a connection of the description of Dehi, the one who has the body or one who dwells in the body or the self, in the similar connection, this verse is continuing. So enam. Accusative, singular, masculine, and here is etad, that is the base word, means this. Chindanti, so this is a verb and this is a present tense, lat lakara, third person, plural. It's a parasmaipadi, and root here is chhed, means to cut. So because it's a third person plural, it becomes they cut. So we'll see what there is a word for they here, but that it's a third person plural, so cut. And shastrani, it's a nominal. So shastrani is nominative, plural, it's a neuter gender. So vanam, vane, vanani, like vana, it's a shastrani, and the base word here is shastra, means weapons. So basically what is this is like one sentence. So what it would mean is weapons cut this not, means weapon do not cut this. So weapons cannot cut this self. Na, again it's a declinable, not enam. It is the same word here. Dahati, it's a verb. So this you probably all are familiar. It's a third person singular here. Parasmaipadi. And here the root is daha, and it means to burn. Pavakaha. So it means burns because it's a singular. Pavakaha. Pavakaha would be nominative, like Rama, singular, masculine, and the base word here is Pavaka, means fire. Pavaka means fire. So this is another sentence here. Nainam dahati pavakaha. Pavakaha enam na dahati. Fire burns this not. Fire does not burn this. So fire cannot burn this self. Na is not. Cha is and. Enam, same thing is being described here again. Kledayanti. This is a verb, and just like Shindanti, it's a third person plural. So let third person plural and parasmaipadi, and this is the root here is klid. Klid means to be wet, and this is a little bit a special verb here. It's a causative. So why is it causative and what does it mean? So klid means to be wet. And when you turn something as causative verb in Sanskrit, that means to make something that way. So it would mean to make it wet, to make wet. So klid means to be wet, and causative, when we turn into it, means to make wet. In English, we somehow use the verb to wet in both ways. We can, but in Sanskrit, the forms are different. So this one would be wet, essentially make wet. So normally we don't say make wet, we just use wet, but that's what it would mean. And apaha, this is nominative, plural, feminine, and the word here is up, means water. So this is a bit special word, apaha. Normally you would expect it would be like a singular, like pavakaha, masculine singular. But this is a very special word, up, and it's a feminine. It's a word for water. And the speciality of this word is that it's always used in plural. So this form which you see, it's a plural form. So apaha, water. That therefore you have, even though water generally we would understand as a singular, but because this is a little bit a special word, here it is plural, and that's why the verb is also plural here, kledayanti. It's not a single. Unlike pavakaha, which is dahati, it's a nominative singular and singular verb. Here it is plural. So water does not wet this. Nacha enam kledayanti apaha. The water does not make it wet. Na means not. Shoshayati. This is also a verb. So let, third person, singular, parasmaipadi, and here the root is shush, means to be dry. And this is also in a causative form, because causative would make it mean to make dry. So the meaning would be make dry. Again, in English we don't use it this way, we just say dries. Marutaha, it is a nominative singular, masculine. Maruta means wind. So wind does not dry it. That's what it means. So that's if you look at just grammatically, this verse is fairly simple. It has like these 4 sentences. Weapons do not or cannot cut it. The fire cannot burn it. The water cannot wet it. And the wind cannot dry it. So this self is being described here again to show the difference from the body, because body can be cut by the weapons, it can be burnt by fire, it can be made wet by water, and it can be dried by wind. All these things are not applicable to the self. Self is not subject to any of these processes. So no matter what kind of weapons it is, they cannot cut the self. Fire, however strong fire could be, it cannot burn the self. So even in the middle of the sun, it will not be able to burn the self. Water cannot make it wet, and the wind cannot make it dry. So that is one way to understand that it is different from the body. Another way, if you look at in this verse, it has been represented that the 5 elements do not affect the self. So Shastra, the weapons, they represent the earth element. So all the weapons need the help of the earth element to make them. The fire, of course, represents the fire element. Water represents the water element, and wind represents the air or wind element. And the 5th element is the space. Because space does not affect anything, it is not mentioned here. In other words, the self is beyond the 5 elements. So in the Vedic literature, this whole world, including our bodies, is described as composed of 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. In this verse, Lord is describing that this self is beyond these 5 elements, and therefore these elements cannot affect it, cannot make any dent in self. So now we move on to the next verse. We'll chant it first. I'll chant one quartet at a time. Achedyoyamadayoyam akledyo shoshya evacha nityah sarvagatah sthanuh achaloyam sanatanah Now the whole verse together. Achedyoyamadayoyam akledyo shoshya evacha nityah sarvagatah sthanuh achaloyam sanatanah. We'll look at the word meaning. Again, the grammatical analysis of this verse is fairly straightforward and simple. Achedya, this is nominal. Ayam is a nominal pronoun. Adaya is a nominal. Ayam is a nominal pronoun. Akledya is a nominal. Ashoshya is a nominal. Eva is indeclinable. Cha is indeclinable. Nitya is nominal. Sarvagata is nominal. Sthanu is nominal. Achala is nominal. Ayam is nominal pronoun. Sanatana is nominal. So one strange thing you will find in this verse, which we have not encountered so far in any of the verses, there is no verb. We don't have any word of the type verb. And I had explained earlier that verb is the central part of a Sanskrit sentence. So you cannot have a meaningful sentence without a verb. So how to make sense of this then? So the verb here is implied. And generally when the verb is implied, it is of the form of asti or bhavati. So here it is asti, as you can see in the anvaya. And once you put that verb, the sentences become really small and simple. So we'll see that. Achedya, this is nominative singular, gender masculine. Base word here is achedya, like Rama. So the meaning of this word is not subject to be cut. So what does this mean? So this word is coming from chid dhatu. So if you see in the previous verse, we had this word chindanti, and the root here is chid. The same root now is deriving this nominal chedya. So the word then becomes chedya, and once you negate it, it becomes so chedya. So chid, and if you make it chedya, means it is subject to be cut. And because we have put the akara in front of it, and because of sandhi rules, additional chakara comes here, it becomes achedya, means not subject to be cut. So this suffix in Sanskrit, which makes from chid to chedya, means to from the root verb cut to something which can be cut. It is similar to in English, we have something like able, like eatable. So eatable means something which can be eaten, or drinkable, something can be drunk. So in English, Sanskrit, we have similar kind of suffix to make these meanings, unlike in English, where this suffix able is used only with certain verbs. In Sanskrit, this can be used with all the verbs. So like we don't say cuttable normally, but technically you could be translating as non-cuttable, if you will be, but in English normally those words are not used. The idea is the same. I am, it is nominative, singular, masculine, and the base word here is idam. It's a pronoun, means this. So I had showed you earlier also. So this idam, that is the word here, the base word, and it has the nominative singular as I am, and enam as the accusative singular. So in the previous verses we saw accusative singular. Now we are seeing the nominative singular. Same word, idam. This. Adaya. So this is another noun of the same kind. Nominative, singular, masculine, and the base word here is adaya, not subject to burn. So it is the exact, very similar word like achedya. It is adaya, coming from daha root. We had this dahati verb, and it has the root as daha. Daha means to burn. So the same root now making this noun, so in English you can say burnable, or no, adaya would becomes non-burnable. I am, again the same word here. Akledya. So this is again the very similar kind of word, nominative, singular, masculine, akledya, and this means not subject to be wet. So you can clearly see the connection between the previous verse and this verse. So in previous verse he is using the verb forms, and the same verb forms now are being used to make this kind of noun. So klid was the verb root in the previous verse, and now it is same root is deriving this noun called kledya, means something can be made wet, and non-wettable. If you could make a word like in English, if you coin a word like in English, it would become like that. Similarly, this word ashosya, exactly the same way. So the four roots which are used in this verse as the verb form, here they are being used in the nominal form. So nominative, singular, masculine, and the base word here is ashosya. Not subject to dry or non-dryable. Eva is indeed, cha is and. These are indeclinables. They don't have any case or anything. They're just the meaning. Nityaha. It is again a nominative singular, masculine, and the base word here is nitya, means not subject to time. Sarvagataha, nominative, singular, masculine, so Sarvagataha, this word is made of two different words. If you see here, it is like Sarvagata. So Gata means gone to, and Sarva means all or everywhere. So Sarvagata means which goes everywhere, or which is everywhere. So present everywhere. Everywhere present, or we can say omnipresent. Sthanuh, this is also nominative singular, masculine, this is the base word sthanu, and this means steady or stable. Achalaha, this is again nominative singular, masculine, achala means immovable. Ayam, this is the same word here. And sanatanaha, this is also nominative singular, masculine. The base word here is sanatana. It means eternal. So we have, because there is no verb, we have to supply the verb forms to make the sentences. So when we supply those verb forms which are implied, as I said, that this is the form of asti, means is. So I am acheda, achedya. So this is one sentence in a way. This is not subject to be cut, means this cannot be cut. This refers again to the self, because that's what is being described here. So this cannot be cut. Adaya, I am, these two again make a sentence. So I am adaya asti. This cannot be burnt. Akledya asti. This self cannot be made wet. Ashoshya asti. This self cannot be made dry. Indeed, this self is not subject to time. That means it is beyond time. It is omnipresent. It is steady or stable. It is immovable, does not move. And this is eternal. So in the previous verse, Lord says that this self cannot be cut by weapons. Weapons cannot cut it. Fire cannot burn it. Water cannot make it wet. And wind cannot make it dry. Here he is again saying the similar thing, but with a little difference. So it is not that weapons cannot cut it. Like it's not a problem that if we could figure out another weapon tomorrow, which is of a very high potency, that might be able to cut the self. So it's not that this self cannot be cut. It's impossible for this self to be cut. Why is it impossible for it to be cut? Because anything which is made of the component parts can be cut. This self is not made up of any component parts. There are no components in the self. Therefore, it cannot be cut. So all the matter in the world, you can keep on dividing, right from molecule to atoms to electron, proton, and then subatomic particles. So therefore, it can be cut and split. But this self does not have any such components. Therefore, it cannot be cut. Similarly, fire cannot burn it, Lord already said, but now here he is saying it's not that fire cannot burn it and maybe there is some other special fire or some special thing which can burn it. That is not so. This cannot be burnt. This is not subject to be burnt. It's impossible for it to be burnt. Similarly, this cannot be made wet, not just by water. Maybe ordinary water is not good enough. There may be some water in another world which might be make it wet. Not possible. So similarly, the wind cannot dry, but maybe there is something else which can make it dry. And Lord is denying that possibility also here, that it cannot be dried. Another way to look at this verse is also that here it is described in terms of 5 elements, like in a gross sense. So this represents the gross body. That gross body can be cut, gross body can be burnt, gross body can be made wet, and gross body can be dried. But self is not the gross body, and therefore it is not subject to any of these things. And here you can say that, okay, it cannot be cut by the weapons, but many a times we say in our expressions that your words have pierced my heart. So the body remains intact, nobody can see any piercings there, but the person feels his heart is pierced by the words of somebody else. And that kind of cutting or that kind of piercing is also not possible for the self. Self cannot be cut or pierced even by the words or any emotions of another person. So self is beyond that. Similarly, a person may be burning out of anger. There is no burning sign on the physical body. Fire is not required there. Anger alone is enough to burn the person. No doctor can treat those burns, but the person feels person is burning. We all have these expressions. And self is not subject to even that kind of burn. No kind of anger can have any impact on the self. Similarly, we can sometimes use the expression of being wet by the shame or something. Again, self is not subject to that kind of being wet also. Nor somebody could be dried out of sorrow, that a person is completely withered out of sorrow. We normally use that expression. But self is not subject to that kind of drying or withering also. So all these things which which I just told you, they refer to the astral body or the subtle body. So self is not the subtle body either. That's what it means. Then, so these are the ways it is defined that what is self cannot be subject to these things. And here he is describing those qualities by using the positive words. Like here it was used with the negative words. Here negation, by the method of negation. Here it is by in Sanskrit we say vidhi or nishedha, by making a positive word, nityaha. But again, because when we try to explain in English, again we makes the use of the negation, simply because whatever we perceive, it is subject to time. So when we say this is self is nityaha, and how do we explain that? Then we say it is not subject to time. So that means it is beyond the time. Sarvagataha. So in the self, there is no past, present, and future. Nitya. Sarvagataha. It's present everywhere. It's omnipresent. There is no place where this self is not. Many times we consider that the soul is like inside the body in some space, little cranium. Sometimes we have that expression that is useful for meditation purposes. But the nature of the self is omnipresence everywhere, not in any particular part of the body. So self is also, these are the two words used to describe the self, sthanu and achala, immovable and stable. So they look very similar. The only difference here is that something moves about. That is, so self does not move about. So it is immovable. And stable is simply that even though something may not move about, like a rock, but it is going through those inner vibrations, those inner changes, that molecules are vibrating, maybe however tiny bit, the atoms are vibrating in place. So those kind of subtle movements are also not there in self, not just the gross movements, but the subtle movements are also not there. So that's where the two words are used to negate those kind of movements. And it is eternal. Eternal simply means here is, it is without beginning. It was never born. There was never a time that, okay, we say from now on the self is. So there was never such a thing. So in these words, Lord describes that self is, it is not possible, self cannot be cut or burnt or made wet or made dry. Similarly, it is not subject to the time. It is omnipresent. It does not move, nor has any kind of subtle vibrations. And it is without any beginning. There is no beginning of the self. So there are some questions, so I'll take the questions now. And if you have anything, you can send it through the comment. But I'll read some questions. So there is a question here, Sanskrit word for causative. So I used this causative roots here. And I said these are the causative verbs. So what is the word for causative in Sanskrit? Sanskrit uses a particular suffix. So if you go by the Panini grammar, it uses the word hetu. So one person becomes the hetu or the cause of performing an action being done by somebody. So that's what the hetu, and there is a suffix called nij. So when you put that suffix, the root becomes causative. The verb becomes causative. So it's technically Sanskrit word is hetu. There is another question here. Etad versus etam, idam. Can you please explain? Isn't 224 a repeat of 221 and 223? Is it for emphasis? So first question is etad versus edam. I'm not sure, there is no word called edam. This is enam versus edam. This, if I go to pronoun table. So there are these two words, imam and enam. And also if you look at here, this is idam in neuter. So the base word is idam here. In plural it becomes ayam. In feminine it becomes iyam, the same word, and in neutral it becomes idam. In the second case we have two forms here, imam and enam. Enam is used only when you are talking about something which has already been discussed. So enam is with the previous reference, while imam can be used without any previous reference. So that is the difference between these two forms. If your question is different, then please clarify. Isn't 224 a repeat of 221 and 223? So if you look at the verses here, 223 and 224, there's a very clear connection, as I explained also. And 221 is also talking about the same thing. In eternal, unborn, subject to not subject to change. So yes, there is a repetition. And Acharya Shankara says here that Lord truly explained those things earlier by this verse alone, to tell that there are 6 aspects of the body, na jayate miryate va kadachit. So in 220 itself, Lord explained very clearly that the body is different and the self is different. The killing of the body, the body being died does not affect the self. Self is not slain. Even though the body is slain, self is not slain. So Acharya Shankara here in his commentary says that in this verse, this has been explained very clearly. So anything further is only for emphasis, and because this self-knowledge, it is very difficult to attain, and it needs a lot of repetition because of our wrong notion about me being is the body. When I refer as I, myself, I refer to as the body and mind. And when Lord is saying that these are the two different things, so that thing has to be emphasized. So there would be repetition, and that's what it is. So in 223, for example, as I explained, you can refer to that as a gross body, and 224 would be for referring to the subtle body. Then there is a question. So Nitya can be translated as eternal also. It is the same as not subject to time. I heard this translation before. So even though these words, Nitya, are not subject to time, and eternal, they look very similar, and many times they are used interchangeably. Here the differentiation is, in case of Sanatana, that it is beginningless. So something could be not subject to time once it is born. So there was a time then it came into existence, and after that it is not subject to time. So many people say that God created this world at a certain point of time, and after that world is there. So world is like Nitya, it is sort of always there. But there was a time when it was not there. And physicists also reaching the similar conclusion, even though there is no consensus on it, that there was a big bang and there was universe started at a particular point of time. Even though we say started particular point of time, but because time did not exist then, yet we agree that there was a beginning of the universe, and after that it has been there. So here the emphasis is that self is not such. That means it is not that God created self at any point of time, and then after that it is Nitya. So that part has been emphasized here. So there is a question here. Baba, does Bhishma Pitava have this knowledge? Vishnu Sahasranamam came from him. If so, why did he make a promise that he stuck to and did not break? So that part is completely different. There's this for those people who may not know the whole story of Mahabharata. So Bhishma Pitama is a character which came in the Gita also. He is the great grandfather of Arjuna, and he is known for his sticking to his promises, to his words. So if he makes a promise, he will not break. That was his defining, one of the very important characteristic. He was like personification of that characteristic, that a promise made has to be stuck no matter what. So the question here person is asking, that does Bhishma have this knowledge of self? And it seems from his utterances that he does, because he gave the knowledge of Vishnu Sahasranama to Pandavas. But I do not see the connection between these two questions. Why did he make a promise that he stuck to and did not break? What is the connection between the self-knowledge and sticking to a promise and not breaking? So that there is no connection between these two things. A person of self-knowledge can be following his promise, and the person is clarifying following dharma. So dharma is a very subtle thing. For Bhishma Pitama, that was his dharma, and he followed. There is a question here. Kriya Yoga focuses on sound, light, and vibration. How do we connect this to this shloka? So you can connect it in the sense of that physical body, astral body, and the causal body. And here the self is beyond all these three. So whatever we hear, the sound, light, and vibration, these are still part of the manifestation. The self, one who is experiencing all those sound, light, and vibration, that which is referred as I, that is beyond this. There is a question here, what is the soul versus self? They are normally used interchangeably. in Sanskrit literature, the self is as an Atman, and that has been more common. That means myself. When you say soul, somehow this idea that I am the soul does not arise easily, but essentially they are the same thing. In English, in Sanskrit, the word Atman, that is what is used, and Atman literally means self, like myself. When I say I hurt myself, in that way, so self. So there is a question here. This person is saying, when is etad used versus idam? So that should be, there are two different pronouns, idam and etad. I think I made a mistake there, and probably in one of the verses I used the word etad. Okay, so it is idam, it's not etad. So but just to clarify your question, these two, both of them, with both of these pronouns, these are used, idam and etad. These are two different pronouns. Both of them are used to refer to something which is close by. As per the Sanskrit traditional way, it is said that idam is something close and etad is something very close. But in practice, it is kind of used different, either way. It can be used interchangeably in some cases. But there are, just to understand that there are two different pronouns for pointing to something which is close by, etad and idam. So there is a question here, is soul and self the same? Then why, when someone dies, they say the soul left the body and takes another birth? But here it is written that soul does not have birth or death. So it's a very beautiful question. The soul does not have birth or death because soul is there. It takes another body. So there is no birth for the soul. The body comes into existence and we say rebirth. But from your statement itself, as you are saying that soul has left the body and takes another body. So it's not another birth. Birth means something comes about new. So it's only the body which comes newly. The self is the same. That's why we call it rebirth. Because it's not the birth of the body, but the soul, just the process, that self taking another body is called rebirth. Self does not change, of course. And this example has been amply clarified in the verse number 222, that just like a person gives up the old clothes and takes the new one, similarly the self gives up the old bodies and takes the new ones. So the person does not change because he changes the clothes, only the clothes are new. So it's like a new cloth we call rebirth. So this person is saying both are defined as this in English, etad and idam, because English does not have two different pronouns. So English only has this. That's why they have to be translated as this in English. Sanskrit has two different pronouns for representing this idea of this, the something pointing to something nearby. There's a question, the self is omnipresent. We are not the body, we are the self. But we are not omnipresent until we are one with God. So these statements, on the one hand, they are correct. On the other hand, they have to be contemplated upon. So it's not that intellectually you can decide that I am one with God, and then the question is, what is God? So all these things are to be contemplated upon. And then slowly the understanding arises. And all the spiritual practices are nothing but making us more fit for attaining that knowledge. To be attaining that knowledge means to be able to see the truth which is existing, not something to create something new. So there is another comment here. This was a flawless explanation. Thank you so much. So there is a question. I am confused about if we are talking about the individualized self or the universal self. So you have to, again, as I said, if you contemplate upon it, that what is individual self, what is universal self, you will understand the answer to that. One of the verses earlier in Gita, which had this thing that no, let me bring out that verse. So here, if you look at, we discussed this verse, Sharirinaha, that is the one who has the body or the self, and then the bodies, this is plural. So you see the bodies are in plural and self is used as in singular. So essentially the self is one. There are no multiple selves. But because we identify ourselves as individual, we use the word as individual self. So there's similar question on question that I'm not still clear. Is your soul different from mine, or is it all but one self underneath? So again, as I said, this question is truly answered when you are able to figure out who you are, like the answer to that, who am I? And there are some tips given that how to contemplate, but when that question is clear, all these doubts then go away. Otherwise, some explanations can help, but truly the true understanding arises only then. Okay, there is a very good question here. If the soul does not change and cannot be destroyed or changed, then what are we trying to change during meditation? The body and mind? So yes, you cannot change the self by meditation. The quality of being able to see yourself as that self, it requires a pure mind, and meditation is for purification of the mind. So meditation helps you to have that instrument. It is like if your glasses are having the dust and dirt, you will not be able to see the things clearly. So here the mind is like the instrument or the glass which has got all this dirt, and self is there to be perceived, but because of the dirt and dust on the mind, cannot perceive the self clearly, can misperceive it. So meditation is to clean the mind. That's what we call chitta shuddhi in English. So there is a comment here, waves and ocean is a good example for individual self and universal self. Yes, this is one of the good examples, and many other examples have been given that way. But here the vision of Vedanta or Gita is primarily that one self is one, and self alone is. So thank you for all these beautiful questions and attending the class. We'll close the class with the prayers. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukha bhag bhavet. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you everyone.